Welcome to the Frontier Leader Show. Today, it's time for something a bit different.
Hello and welcome to the Frontier Leader Show. I'm Martin Wheatley, and most weeks I speak to leaders, technologists, change makers in the AI space, figuring out what good leadership looks like in an AI-shaped world. Whilst you still have your phone in your hand, I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss the next one that will come out next week. But today is slightly different. I'm not interviewing anybody. I am going to share a talk that I gave last week, which was all around AI, the hype in the media, and what's actually happening with people on the ground and what it means for teams and roles and all that kind of good stuff. And, you know, with anything like this, I am sure there will be some new release that will change the view on some of these in the next coming weeks. Who knows? The new ChatGPT 5.6 might get released from the government. Claude's Fable might come back online. Who knows? But for now, I hope you enjoy this. This is slightly different, and let me know any feedback in the comments. Let's get into it. So, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? That used to be quite a predictable question, and one you could probably answer straight away when you had any kind of job interview. But with all the hype on AI and with all the news about job layoffs and how it's going to automate everything, it's quite a hard question to answer now, I think. And it's on a lot of people's mind. And when Victoria and Owen when we first started speaking about this, you know, it's becoming more and more of a question, especially amongst Gen Zs coming into the marketplace. So my background is finance. I'm SEMA. I used to manage or lead a big finance shared service in insurance, onshore and offshore, accounts payable, accounts receivable, standard kind of stuff. And up to kind of last year, I was still doing that, albeit on the automation side. And it's only really been this year where I've kind of pivoted fully into AI. But prior to that, I've kind of been following AI since before ChatGPT came out, and some of the earlier tools before they came around. So I'm going to go through a bit of a leadership lens in terms of, you know, what's the hype, what's actually happening in the media versus what isn't, what's actually the reports and the stats that are coming out behind some of the AI movement, what the impacts of that we're starting to see in jobs, and then ultimately what that means for people on the ground with an example of something that you can do in finance quite quickly. So you might have heard of these three people, certainly Mr. Musk, the world's first trillionaire on the right-hand side there, but Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, ChatGPT, Dario Amodei, if that's how you pronounce it, Anthropic and Claude, which is the other rival, the main rival to ChatGPT, I would say. And the sentiment since ChatGPT came out has been entire classes of jobs will go away and won't come back. We're going to get rid of all entry-level jobs. And Elon's a bit further the other way. If you want to do a job that's kind of like a hobby, you can do a job. So the messaging from the outset has been very job apocalypse. This is happening. If you don't get on board, you're behind the curve. But that's not really happening yet. And I say yet. They were predicting 5 years. I think it's going to take longer than that. And there's a lot of media coming out now with people saying, you know, that it's going to take longer. And there's reasons for that, which I'll go through. But first of all, just before I go on to this slide, who uses a paid version of ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So first thing I just wanted to show you is this chart on the right is the entire of the world's population. Now each dot represents 3.2 million people, and there's different colours depending on how many and what people are using. So if you are paying for a ChatGPT or whatever license, you're in the top 0.8% of the entire world. So we are very, very, very early in this technology. Regular free users, again, it's only 1 billion. People have tried it and thought, well, you know what, it hallucinates. It gives me answers that I didn't really want. I'm not going to touch it again. And then there's obviously 6 billion that either aren't online, have never seen it, or don't have access to the internet. So the point I wanted to make here is if you've paid for it, you're in this little bit of a row there, which is tiny in the grand scheme of things. So congratulations, you're 0.8% of the world. The other kind of reason, other than the people, it's not migrated yet into a lot of people paying for subscriptions, is how it's actually been used. Has anybody seen these charts before? No? Okay. They're both essentially saying the same thing, but one's from OpenAI on the left and one's from Anthropic on the right. And what they're essentially trying to do is map out the capability of their models, their technology, against a specific occupation or job role versus the realized what people are actually using it for. So this top one here from OpenAI is business and financial operations. So what this is saying is roughly 90 to 95% of the tasks, not job, of the tasks within that kind of occupation could theoretically be done by AI, but only 30% is currently being done. And it's very similar with Anthropic, that's business and finance there. And it's, again, the red is the equivalent of what's actually been observed when people have used their models. So again, when all the hype's coming out about saying it's all going to take our jobs, they're talking around this curve here. But actually, adoption is really scattered and really quite low down. So now this will obviously increase. People are going to get better at using it. The models, I think there's a new version of ChatGPT that's meant to come out today. So you will start seeing this increase now. But this was as at, I think it was April, March times. Pretty recent data just in terms of how many people are using it and where they're using it. Legal is really high when you look at the percentages because they churn through a lot of data, a lot of documentation, and they're comparing documents and redlining files and everything like that. So, but business and finance, it doesn't break it down any further than that, so I can't say exactly what these increments are, but these are specific tasks. Doesn't mean that everyone in business and in finance operations is going to suddenly lose their role. It's tasks within a role. And that's kind of the macro picture of where people are using it. So there's not that many people using it, and even though there's all this capability, there's a really small slither that is actually currently being used today. So everybody in this room who feels under pressure to use AI, don't feel under pressure to use AI. You are way ahead of the curve, even just by being in this room, I can guarantee you. So the capability runs far ahead of the behavior in almost every category. And, you know, the Anthropic report goes a bit further and looks at the impact since ChatGPT launched and LLMs, large language models, took off. Has that had, and this is all American, but has that had an impact on the labour market, on recruitment? And what they've actually proven, bearing in mind this is from the company that sells the model, so there's a bit of skepticism in here, but that red line here is roles that are highly exposed to AI. So your business and finance, the ones that are high, 90-odd%. And they more or less track exactly the same pattern as roles that are low impact by AI. So think builders, plumbers, things that you can't replace with a computer. So they were essentially saying that there hasn't been a statistical measurable rise in unemployment just because of it, despite the headlines that Oracle got rid of 30,000 people, Amazon binned off however many thousand, Meta just got rid of 18,000 recently. A lot of that has been proven, and I think was it Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft? I watched him on a podcast yesterday, and even he admitted that the Microsoft redundancies weren't because of AI, they were because of the reallocating capital to spend on AI, but it's not because of productivity gains of AI. It's overhiring in COVID, and there's all these other factors that have gone into it, but we're way ahead of, the narrative is running way ahead of where the actual numbers are coming from. The only thing that did highlight was in young people coming into the market out of universities, essentially. So this red line again here is showing the roles that are highly exposed to AI for 22 to 25-year-olds, and the blue is no exposure. And you can see a tail off from their own data to show this. And you know, there was a report by Ravio, I think it's a consultancy firm in Europe, that shows that hiring is down 63% on last year, just on, you know, initial younger junior talent into finance roles across Europe as a whole. So there's different sources now trying to say the same thing, which is concerning for any organization because the leadership pipeline is going to be whittled away at the bottom of it. Microsoft, however, are saying that the people who use their tools are now, or 80% of the people who use their frontier tools, which is you might have a Copilot license for argument's sake, but then companies can then opt in to be a frontier and they'll get access to Premier functionality before the mass public do. They're saying that of the people that are in that frontier program testing the cutting edge, if you like, 80% of them could do work today that they couldn't even dream of doing a year ago. And that is productivity. That is work that they couldn't get around to doing. That is higher level work rather than admin tasks. So overall numbers aren't changing, but slow down on younger talent and the roles are changing into higher kind of order activities. And that's the theme that's going to run through the rest of this piece is what do you do with that time that you might get from a productivity kick when you start having Copilot reply to all your emails. Don't do that, by the way. It doesn't work out well. And like I said, finance is exposed to AI. It's similar to coding in many respects. It's highly repeatable. It's rules-based. It's predefined, and AI will just lap it up. So having this conversation, been in this room and understanding the impacts of it and how teams, it's looking like teams have been structured, is going to bear fruit in the future. Good adoption, in my opinion, is not just going out and giving everybody a Copilot license. I think there's benefits to that to some extent. If you want to burn through a load of cash and not get any real buy-in, it's looking at what work you need to do that's different, that you couldn't do a year ago. It's asking the question of what can my team do today with AI that they couldn't do yesterday? That's the question, not the cutting headcount out. That's the wrong question. And this information on this slide is actually taken from Amazon about what they're seeing with team structures and company structures. So we've got the typical kind of pyramid that everybody knows, the hierarchical pyramid in a company, leaders at the top, seniors in the middle, and then your junior staff feeding the pipeline up. Works really well, or meant to be efficient for communication, depending on who you talk to. But what we're seeing with a lot of this, which kind of falls back to the younger talent pipeline coming through, is that the bottom of the pyramid has been eroded because people are seeing that productivity hit, clearing out the admin, and then not replacing the bottom of the pipe, if you like. Works if you're very short-termist because you'll get a kickback in any investment. You can say you've saved X amount of millions in heads and you're just having an AI do it, but it creates a problem for you in the future. The inverted pyramid, aka the pod, is what they're saying teams organize around. And it's having domain expertise at the top, running the team, and handing off a load of tasks to agents rather than delegating it out to a lot of people. So it's essentially the bottom half of that diamond. And that's what a lot of people think is going to happen, is you're going to have these domain experts running, orchestrating agents underneath them, handing off tasks to agents, just reviewing what's coming through, like a manager would to a junior member of staff, for argument's sake, but with an agent instead. And to combat that, companies need to start thinking about, that's fantastic. From an efficiency point of view, that's fantastic. You know, you have your domain experts, they know what they're doing, they can spot when the AI goes off-piste and hallucinates or whatever. But if one of them gets hit by a bus on Monday morning on the way into work, what's going to happen? So the hourglass is kind of merging the pod, but then consciously having juniors, the purpose of juniors coming back up through the organization in a different manner. And that's the kind of nirvana that we need to think about to protect the fact that in 2036, it's the leaders in 2036 are going to be the people who you hire in 2026. Now, there's been a few good examples of that recently. I think IBM have been one that have gone out and purposefully said we are actually hiring a lot more juniors now because we know this is going to be a problem. IKEA have just done a big AI rollout, no redundancies, no nothing. We've just reshaped roles. Costco did it in America, and that's got 340,000 employees. It's possible, but the trap early on is very much to see we can just cut heads at the bottom, which again is the wrong question. Now, in my opinion, it's the wrong question. I'm not a CFO. Finance shared services. So this slide is just a bit of an example of the kind of possibilities that AI could deliver you. Now, some of these you will look at and think, what the hell are you talking about? And some of them you'll think, well, we've had suppliers in before that told us we'll only deal with, 0.3 exception rates, and you don't have to touch the process or anything like that. But the big differential with AI is it isn't just somebody landing a new policy admin system or CRM on your desk and leaving you to it. It's fundamentally changing how everybody works. And humans have a real struggle understanding exponentiality because everybody likes to like linear and iteration and one step at a time. But the way that the models are progressing, it's a very steep J curve. So when you look at things like continuously reconciled ledgers, it's always closed, period end, it becomes a non-event. And you're like, yeah, whatever. You've only had one glass of Prosecco, sit down. That's the kind of mindset shift that this technology will bring. Absolutely. Touchless end-to-end, coded, matched and posted with zero keystrokes, for invoice processing, cash application done, queries handled by agents, which is remarkably easy to set up for managing inbox queries and replying, auto-replying and stuff like that. But again, it's the fact that this technology is coming, it changes the agency from a technology company being able to implement this to you and your team being able to implement this, depending on guardrails and everything. And I'll show you what I mean by that just on a reporting example. Like I said, I was going to do this as a video. This was a really straightforward. So I went into ChatGPT to begin with, and I asked it to create 3 month-end accounts receivable age debtors report. Standard stuff you can pull off any half-decent system. Took it into Claude Co-work and just pretty much put that prompt in. I'm not expecting you to read it, but it didn't have any other information other than those 3 files and me essentially saying, give me a slide on the position and overall trends of the movement, and I want you to drill down into specific clients. Now, my initial first role in finance was in accounts receivable, and it used to take ages for anybody on the team to give me that level of analysis. Now, some tools will do it. You can argue that Power BI can do this quite quickly. But again, it comes back to the point of, I've not used Power BI for this, and it's done it in 5 minutes, and it's created 2 charts, or 2 slides, should I say. I've validated these numbers. These numbers are all right. So it's gone in, it's mapped out every single trend, how much is query disputed, it's pulled out, growth is healthy, the book is aging, disputes the driver, not distress. And then it's pulled together the sentiment of the comments that are held on a typical age debt chasing kind of log. And it's identified 3 kind of improvements for the accounts receivable person to go look at. Now, that was a quick 5-minute run through on Claude. Now, granted, I've got something sat in the background that says this is the template of my presentations. These are the colors, these are the fonts, this is how I want everything. But once you've got that set up, you could run that every single day without a shadow of a doubt. And the interesting bit is how it interprets all the data that you would normally have to rely on somebody to do a lot of that work. And you'd still need someone to check it, don't get me wrong. But it's the fact that it can do it so quickly that it then frees up a massive amount of time for the person in accounts receivable to either have conversations with more people or better conversations with internal or external people. And that was just on 3 spreadsheets. So this is where the builder maker change is coming for people who start using this technology. If you built this into a proper structured prompt, which mine wasn't, by the way, it was just me speaking into the computer. If you really structured it out and gave it specific information, exactly how you knew the board wanted to drill down into certain areas, you could connect it up to your credit policy, your contract terms, you could connect it up to your done-in cycle documentation with all the letters. You could use a prior pack. You could upload last month's pack if you wanted to compare it against last month's and all that stuff. Then you could connect it up to any kind of transcripts of calls you've had with clients to give it that extra context around Apex construction partners, for argument's sake. It could reference the calls that you've had to say, well, actually, James said this, so actually we're going to flag the risk slightly differently on there. You might want to have a further call. Link it up with MCPs, which is just a fancy way of saying an API, application interface, to your credit reference agencies. So automatically on a morning, if something seems to slip, it can pull all the information back and give you a real-life dashboard instantly. And like I said, you just automate it. Now that takes, it looks a lot but you can do that in about 10 minutes if you've got the connectors sat in the background. And that's what I mean by thinking exponentially, because that would have, if you were to build that yourself a year ago, that would take a hell of a lot of work to do. And you can do that in Claude Co-work and potentially Microsoft Copilot Co-work in, not long at all to build that kind of thing up. And this isn't to scare you to say, shit, This is to show you what's possible, because once you've got the grasp of these bits of technology up here, which pretty much is spoken word, a documentation, you could do that with a simple connector, and then you just make it repeatable, put it on the schedule, which you literally just say, make this happen every morning at 9 a.m. and it will run the same thing every day at 9 a.m. until you tell it not to. That's what I mean by this technology. People are only using a small fraction of it to analyze a spreadsheet or read my email or look at this PDF and pull out every word that says unicorn or something. Now, there's a lot of governance that needs to happen behind that, which I know Neil is going to touch on in some of the data aspects. We mentioned kind of expert in the loop or human in the loop, as they tend to call it, where, you can't just send that off to your CFO and say, there you go, without reviewing it. That would be career suicide overnight. You'd never have it suddenly go into the system and suddenly start writing off transactions or anything like that. So you'd build in those kind of control mechanisms, which is why when I was mentioning about domain experts, that's why you still need that person. You still need that person to coordinate all this, because it can go very wrong. And because it moves very fast, it can go very wrong very fast. You need someone, there's a load behind ISO, I think it's ISO 42001, which is all about the controls of using AI. Does anybody work in Europe? No? We don't need to worry about the EU AI Acts, then that's fine. But, there's different classifications of system, how you control it, who's the named owner of every process, who's in control of it, who validates it, who tests it. And just because somebody can build this today, like I said, ChatGPT, there's meant to be a new version coming out today that might completely rework. Just that model update on its own might completely change how this comes out. So then you'll have to go back and re-engineer the prompt. So it's an iterative cycle. Even though it looks amazing, it still needs that iteration. That's why I'm saying it's different from somebody just plonking a CRM on your desk and saying use it, because you need to understand how do I structure the prompt, how do I connect it correctly, how do I validate that it's correct, and do that on a regular cadence. So look, the technology is arriving either way. A lot of people in this room have started using it. I speak to people quite a lot. I have a podcast, subscribe, where you listen to decent podcasts called the Frontier Leader Show, and I speak to people every week who started using this and how they're implementing. So it's interesting to see how people are using this technology now. But the only variable is whether you are directing it and being in this room and having this conversation and thinking about how the second order and third order events of just suddenly putting this on someone's desk, or whether you've been directed by it. So coming back to our original question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Option 1 is designing the operating model the machines run inside, which is the best option. Option 2 is fighting the Terminator with the rest of us survivors. So a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but this technology is there. By asking these questions now and getting ahead of the curve, you can steer it in the right way that makes it so it isn't always a doom and gloom scenario and a job apocalypse, because I don't think that serves anybody, despite what all the original hype was around AI taking roles. So there we go. That is it for this week. If you can like or subscribe to the podcast while you still have the phone in your hand, please do so. It does make a massive difference to me. And if you are interested in leading with AI, I have a growing number of resources and interesting perspectives available on the AILeaderLab.com. So go and check this out after you've left a review on this podcast. But until next time, bye-bye for now.